It's an important topic that's getting lots of attention on social media and in some news outlets, but it deserves a whole lot more. I'm talking about the Alabama prison strike. A few weeks ago, incarcerated people in Alabama prisons were striking against the awful conditions that they're forced to deal with. Now, the strike currently is on pause as they wait for the governor and state legislators to respond to their demands. But the issues behind the strike have not stopped. A couple of weeks ago, we sat down with some organizers, some journalists to talk about what was happening on the ground in that moment. And I want to make sure that you don't miss it. Now, take a look at this. It's a rat you're looking at. This incarcerated person is holding an actual rat. This is the conditions they're living under. These walls that you're looking at have blood on them. The toilet, it's broken and there's a bucket on top of it. This is what people are using to relieve themselves. I mean, there are people who talk about the third world conditions and how bad things are, but this is third world conditions. This is deplorable. How is this allowed in a country that prides itself on being democratic and fair and just and humane? It's just not. Now, that's just in one of the prisons. Alabama's prison system recently went viral when shocking images of Castillo Vaughn were posted by his family showing his condition. I got to warn you, this stuff is disturbing. Vaughn's sister, Cassie, posted this in September seeking media attention. You can see his bones and the whites of his eyes. His eyes roll back in his head. I mean, he looks like a different person. His sister says in July he looked fine, and then just 2 months later, he lost 75 pounds after having a major surgery. It's like I almost don't even recognize him. Now, family attorneys say he had the surgery in September to remove part of his intestines that was affected by a gunshot injury that happened prior to going to jail. And the family says he was released from the hospital hours after the operation. Think about this. Has an operation, a major surgery, and then gets put right back into general population hours later. Vaughn is currently serving time at Elmore Correctional Facility in Montgomery County. That's about 80 miles south of Birmingham. He's serving 20 years for breaking and entering. This is just one of the stories coming out of Alabama's prison system, which has been called one of the deadliest in the United States. There have been at least 14 homicides in Alabama prisons this year. That's according to the Equal Justice Initiative. But that doesn't account for the suicides or the 190 incarcerated people whose deaths have been classified by the Alabama Department of Corrections as other. With just 2 months left in the year, the state is on track to exceed the 18 homicides recorded in 2019, which was the deadliest year in Alabama prisons to date. The Department of Justice found from September of 2018 to September of 2019, at least 280 incarcerated people had to be hospitalized for serious injuries. From September 2019 to June 2020, 825 prisoners were assaulted. This all happened after the Justice Department ordered an investigation into Alabama's prison system. The investigation started in October of 2016, and in the 6 years since the DOJ investigation started, conditions have gotten worse. Here's what the DOJ investigation found. Alabama Department of Corrections fails to protect prisoners from violence and sexual abuse, which of course is a form of violence. Correctional officers frequently use excessive force. They routinely misclassify causes of death, like saying somebody who was murdered died of natural causes. The DOJ also found the state failed to provide safe and sanitary conditions. They also found that there are serious deficiencies in staffing and supervision, and that the prisons are severely overcrowded. Alabama prisons were designed, just to be clear, when we talk about overcrowding, they were designed to hold about 9,800 men. At the time of the DOJ investigation, more than 15,000 men were incarcerated. This is nuts. This is absolutely nuts. 50% more people in a prison that already doesn't have the basic needs met, doesn't offer the basic provisions. And here's the kicker. Alabama has known about the dangerous conditions for years. They just refuse to address them. All of that is what triggered the strike that lasted for weeks. Joining me now is this woman who organized the strikes, Diyawn Caldwell. She has a personal connection to this story that we'll get into. She's also founded the advocacy group Both Sides of the Wall. Also joining us is Veronica Johnson, who is the executive director of Alabama Justice Initiative, and of course, We'll be joined by Keri Blakinger later, who is an investigative reporter with the Marshall Project. I want to thank you all for joining us to discuss this very important topic. Diyawn, there are reports that the strikes have been stamped out. What is the pulse?
Well, the guys have come to the conclusion that they are going to um, just come up off of the strike for, you know, a period of time that is to be unknown, to give the legislators and the governor time to address their grievances. And if their grievances are not addressed in a, you know, proper amount of time, whatever they deem that to be, they will start back, exercising their First Amendment rights.
Okay, so this is important. So they've been striking, and at the time of this recording, they're still striking. But what you're hearing and what I've heard on the ground from some of my sources is that they're going to stop the strike. And as you said, give the lawmakers some time and the governor some time to respond. And then if they don't respond, they're going right back to the strike. That makes sense to me. What I wonder, Veronica, is what it will take to get them to say, hey, our needs have been met, because there are demands that have been made. Can you talk about what those demands are and what has the governor said so far? Because from where I sit, it doesn't seem like he's been very responsive.
No, she hasn't been responsive. So one of the things that the national or the media here in Alabama has done is that they've downplayed what's really going on here in the state. And so they've given the people or the national media false narratives. So they were saying the strike was over long before it ended. So at least earlier this week, they were saying that all of the facilities had dropped out of the strike, which was absolutely not true. They were still participating. The guys make that determination. We follow their lead. So they're presenting false narratives. That's the first thing. The second thing is this means that the Alabama Department of Corrections sees the ramifications of them not allowing the brothers on the inside the things that they need. They see that they need them in order to sustain these prison systems. So they need to make provisions with the parole board, as well as with other entities, to ensure that these guys are being given proper treatment, such as parole, and also they're being treated fairly on the inside. So it says a lot. Basically, at this point, they are telling them, hey, this is what we can let happen, or either you all can help us and we'll ensure that everything is okay on the inside. So they've kind of put the ball in the state court.
Now, I hear people who are opposing the strike saying things like, the purpose of the strike is to put murderers and rapists back on the street. Diyawn, when you hear that, what do you say?
It's very disturbing, because how can you say something like that and you haven't even gave us the opportunity to explain what it is we're asking for? If you want to make a statement, a harsh statement like that, then you need to speak with the people that are presenting the demands. We're not trying to let rapists and serial killers out. We're trying to let people out that their institutional parole officer has come to the prison and evaluated them with their Ohio risk assessment, and they deemed them eligible to be granted parole. Eligible to move on to the next process, may I say.
Right. It could be parole, it could be work release, could be a few different options, right? But the idea is to say if people are eligible to not be caged anymore, they can go to another phase. That leads to taking away some of the overcrowding in the prison and getting people into spaces where they can kind of return to society and not pose much of a danger to society. I mean, that seems pretty straightforward to me, and yet the governor, she is ignoring that. Some of the
Yes.
legislators are ignoring that. Is that right?
Yes, they're definitely ignoring it. And let me add this as well. This is their guidelines. These are their assessments, and these are their institutional parole officers. So if you're saying that these people have been, they score high enough on the assessment to be be referred to go in front of the parole board, and they have taken every rehabilitative class or course that they can take. They have taken, trades. They have gotten their GED and some college degrees. And you're going to tell me that based upon the guidelines that have been set forth in front of them, they are a great candidate for parole. They've done everything that is possible to do inside a prison. Their disciplinary record is clear, and you're still denying them parole.
It makes absolutely no sense to me. Everybody, we gotta take a quick break, but we're gonna come back because I want to talk to y'all about how the state law violates constitutional rights. Welcome back to theGrio with Marc Lamont Hill. We have been talking with Diyawn Caldwell and Veronica Johnson. Keri Blakinger will join us a little bit later about the deplorable conditions of the Alabama prison that has led to an inmate strike. The DOJ has found that the Alabama prisons were violating 8th Amendment rights, 14th Amendment rights. There's a list of violations here. How can state laws allow things to get this bad?
Because they're profiting off of the backs of our people. That's why they allow it to get that bad. The system is doing exactly what it's designed to do. We want to say we want to fix the system, but it's not broken.
So if the system isn't broken and it's doing what it's designed to do, then it sounds like we got to break the system. And one of the things that makes it worth breaking is the level of danger. But Veronica, I hear people say, well, yeah, prisons are dangerous, but they're dangerous because there's dangerous people in there. The violence that you're complaining about, it's prisoner on prisoner violence. And I'm saying, well, what about the COs?
Right.
What about what about the staff? Talk to me about that. Is the violence just prisoner on prisoner?
Of course not. The violence most definitely isn't prisoner on prisoner. The violence is oftentimes the COs and in retaliatory methods against the brothers on the inside. So what we'll see oftentimes is when the COs can't have their way, then they oftentimes take it out on one or two individuals, but they usually use groups. So it's about 4 or 5 COs against one individual. We had a situation maybe about a year and a half ago, one of our brothers who helps or assists in organizing, they literally beat this guy into a coma. He had to be airlifted to one of the local hospitals, and they wouldn't provide his family with any information about his well-being. And so that's what they do. So no, it's not just the brothers on the inside, it's the COs as well. And let's not leave out the wardens, because they are heading these facilities, right? So that's just like me saying I have no control over my house. I have total control over my house. So the wardens have it in their hand or in their power to do a lot more than what they're actually doing. So
why they're not doing it?
Why would it benefit? Then they probably won't have a job. And from what I see, it benefits them more to, one, have that position of power, and two, to be able to say, well, they are justified, or the COs are justified in their actions because this is a prison. And they say that quite often. But that's not necessarily the case. Whenever you take a person and put them inside a facility, the number of people receiving their GEDs has dropped significantly over the past 10 years. You want to know why? That's because the system won't really allow them to get their GEDs anymore. You talked about the deaths. So a lot of these deaths that happen inside of the prisons, they now go into a section. If you go to the Alabama Department of Corrections website, they put out a report every month, and it lists the deaths. The number of unclassified deaths inside the Alabama Department of Corrections is crazy. How can it be 2022 and these deaths are still being put on as unclassified? I could go on and on, but
no, but I mean, you're going somewhere important, because there's a long history of prisons not being humane precisely because the money is in the inhumanity. The money is in recidivism, not in rehabilitation. After the Civil War, as you all know, but some of the audience may not, the black codes replaced the slave codes, and the black codes made so many things illegal. It created criminality. In other words, there weren't criminals until there were these new laws, and then suddenly these former enslaved people were now criminals based on these new laws, and then they would get locked up, and then they would get leased to plantations. They get leased to railroads. They were part of a convict lease system that basically replicated slavery. What I'm hearing is that in Alabama, y'all doing the same thing again. We're seeing convict leasing, that people are literally leasing incarcerated people to private facilities. Is that true?
It is absolutely true. We have people that go out and work in hotels. They work in restaurants. They work in government buildings. They clean the park and recreations areas. They work on the side of the road picking up trash. All of that is a part of what you're saying, convict leasing. Not only that,
For how much? Because some people will be like, well, it's good they get a job. They ain't had no job before. How much they getting paid to do this work?
Can I jump in?
$2. Go ahead.
If you look on Alabama Department of Corrections website, even those people who are in work release have to give a large portion of their check that they earn in work release to the Alabama Department of Corrections. And they actually on the Alabama Department of Corrections, their monthly report, they list out the amount of money that they make. And that's just the reported amount, not from all of the other convict leasing. That's just the work release participants and that money that they're getting from them on a monthly basis. So just imagine the amount of money that they're really getting when you go back to this convict leasing, which they'll say that it's not convict leasing because they're getting a portion of the money.
But the money's a couple dollars an hour, right?
Yeah, well, try sometimes, in some instances, $2 a day. Try 35 cents, an hour. They're taking these $2 or $3 home, well, not home, but, into their inmate account a day, when in actuality, if you look at it at a 40-hour week, they may be getting, $800 to $1,000 off of them.
Got you. So they're literally exploiting them. It really is slavery. I'm working I'm working a $10 hour job. I'm just getting 35 cents of the $10, and they getting the other $9.65.
Right. And then if you look at it even further, I'm sorry, Mark, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, please.
But if you look at it even further, we have these people that are working out in society already. We have them that are already doing these jobs. They have the same uniforms on. There's no way to tell the difference between them and someone that comes in off, out of society, off the streets. So if you're telling me that they can go out and work these jobs without being violent, without having any infractions, why can't they go home on parole and take care of themselves and their family?
Right. And somehow you're not rehabilitatable. You're not safe when it comes time to go home and earn a job, but you're rehabilitatable and safe enough to go earn money for somebody else. Hang right there. We're going to talk about more of this. Everybody stay right here at theGrio. We're going to talk about the Alabama prison strike, but we're going to talk about mass incarceration and the crisis of exploitation and violence that we see inside of America's prisons every single day. Welcome back to theGrio with Marc Lamont Hill. I'm joined by Diyawn Caldwell, organizer of the Alabama prison strike. Her husband, Cordarius Caldwell, is incarcerated in one of the prisons and is joining the protests from behind bars. Diyawn is here to tell us his story.
I met my husband while incarcerated. He is doing a 23-year prison sentence. Upon meeting him, I started seeing, certain things that I didn't agree with. And I started seeing how they were being treated. In the summer months, it is upwards to 110 degrees, and they're suffering. They're aggravated, agitated, and you can hardly breathe when they lock you in a dorm with over 100 and sometimes 80 men. So they're in this warehouse. They're stuck right up under each other because it's not even 6 feet apart, and they can't go anywhere. They lock them down. It's hot. The ventilation system is horrible. They're having breathing issues. They have black mold inside of the restrooms and different spots in the dormitories. And I just didn't agree with it. I didn't like it, and I didn't understand how they can allow.
What made you jump to action? I spend a lot of time in prisons, and I see lots of people go and visit. They see their people, their loved ones, they see the conditions, they hear their loved one talk about the conditions, and then they go back home. How'd you get from seeing it, looking around and saying this is messed up, to saying I'm going to organize?
When I love someone, I love them wholeheartedly. And I can't sit around and see someone that I love being mistreated or living in conditions that are not even fit for animals. So as this man being my husband, how can I sit around and allow this to happen and not say anything, knowing that he can't say, he can say something, but it's a limitation of the things that he can do as well. So I need to be that voice that's going to push, the needle and make sure things are getting done, because who can say that they love someone and see these things happening and go home and go to sleep comfortably? I can't.
Well, that is a testament to your courage, your compassion, and your vision. But don't go nowhere. We're going to stay right here. We're going to have the conversation. We're going to bring Veronica back, and we're going to talk about how the upcoming midterm elections could provide some relief. Stay right here. Welcome back to theGrio with Marc Lamont Hill. We are talking about the Alabama prison strike after years of neglect and abuse. More than a dozen incarcerated people have been killed in state prisons, with hundreds severely injured behind the wall. The DOJ has been investigating for years, but voters could be the ones who help turn the tide this midterm election season. Up for grabs are the state's governor's seat, currently held by Kay Ivey. Numerous seats in the state legislature, the state Supreme Court, and seats in the U.S. Congress are also on the ballot. Back with us now are Diyawn Caldwell and Veronica Johnson, who are working with incarcerated people in Alabama's prison system for better conditions. I'm also going to be joined in a little bit by investigative reporter and formerly incarcerated person, Keri Blakinger. Let me talk to y'all about these DOJ findings. Governors don't like to be embarrassed. Legislatures don't like to be embarrassed. The DOJ findings, it's hard for me to look at them and not say, how are y'all not embarrassed? How is the state responding to this?
Well, they're kind of nonchalant about it, if you ask me. There are things that can be done and things they can be doing, and they're just not doing anything. They're not saying anything, they're not doing anything, and they're not making any progress on the things that should be corrected. Their biggest thing or their fix or go-to for everything is to build new prisons.
That seems to be the one answer. They say the only tool you have is a hammer, everything look like a nail. And it seems like all they got is the solution of prison, build more, lock more people up, arrest more people, punish, and it doesn't seem
it's a big money scheme.
Right. And so even with the building of new prisons, so the DOJ report, if I can just give you a little bit more detail about it, the DOJ report was released in 2019, I believe, and it basically said that our prisons were inadequate. We have the most dangerous prisons in the country. And so they made some suggestions as to what should be done in order to make our prison population a little safer. Well, our governor, in her infinite wisdom, decided that building new prisons would make the prison safer. So one of the things she did was they tried to contract with Core Civic to build privatized prisons in Alabama. So Core Civic, after it damaged its reputation with the federal government, rebranded itself as Core Civic. And so now the state of Alabama decided they wanted to use them to build new prisons. Well, we rallied against this to got them to not build the prisons in the state of Alabama. But the thing about that was, in order for those prisons to fund themselves, they had to be at 120% capacity. So I'm not a math genius, my degree in political science. So they tell you how well I add and subtract. But 120% doesn't look like it's doing anything to alleviate prison overcrowding. And that's not what the DOJ suggested. So once we shut down that particular project, they came back about a year and a half later, and then they got legislative approval to build 3 new prisons. Guess what they're using this time? COVID relief money. They're taking $400 million
Wow.
of the COVID relief funds that the government has granted the state of Alabama, and they're building new prisons with them. So that kind of tells you where the head and where the mindset of the legislation as well as the governor of the state of Alabama is. We are not about the people.
So speaking of the DOJ lawsuit against Alabama for prisons is pending. Democrats could lose the balance of power in the Senate with these midterm elections. President Obama signed the Fair Sentencing Act, which reduced mandatory minimums for certain drug convictions. What can the Biden administration do that would force Alabama to do right by these inmates in light of, the midterms shifting some power, in light of the DOJ lawsuit still pending? What can they do?
So let me tell you one important fact about that DOJ lawsuit, and most people overlook these. So let me tell you how bad the prison conditions are in the state of Alabama. The DOJ lawsuit was a Republican president, who was Donald Trump at the time, sued a deep red Republican state, which is Alabama, and it was signed by William Barr. That goes to show you just how bad our prisons are. It wasn't Democrats that did
you say it was so bad Donald Trump was outraged?
Yes.
that
Yes.
tells you like it wasn't the Democrats that did this. A deep red state. I mean, like the red is of the red, and this is what happened. So I don't even know if Democrats can help us during these midterm elections. It's gonna.
Is there any race though? Are y'all looking at any race in the midterms where y'all like, you know what, this one will help, this one could be a deal maker or a deal breaker? I mean, obviously, if you have a governor who is humane, you can get everything from pardons to, executive orders and such. But that ain't happening in Alabama, probably. What are y'all looking for?
They sent Tommy Tuberville to watch. They pulled Doug Jones out of Washington and sent Tommy Tuberville. I don't know if you've been looking at the news lately, but have you heard what Tommy Tuberville said? Like, come on, bro. Like,
yo, I want my audience to see this clip, because Tommy Tuberville said something that was, it was about reparations. It was about crime. It was disgusting. Take a look.
Some people say, well, they're soft on crime. No, they're not soft on crime. They're pro-crime. They want crime. They want crime because they want to take over what you got. They want to control what you have. They want reparation because they think the people that do the crime are owed that. They are not owed that.
So with people running for office saying stuff like that, how do y'all have any hope in the electoral process at all for giving some relief to incarcerated folk?
It's hard, especially with what we have to work with. So it's hard to even think that we're going to get any change in this this midterm election. I mean, that's just my opinion. Veronica, you can chime in if you like.
Yeah, somebody asked me the other day, where's my hope? On a scale of 1 to 5, do I have any hope? I said, yeah, my hope level is a 5. Like, I'm always gonna have hope. I'm not gonna let these people kill my hope or destroy what I'm pushing for, what I'm working for. So if we get into this legislative session and they put more Republican legislators in office, I'm fine with that. That just means I got to work a little bit harder. But it doesn't change my commitment. It doesn't change my fight. We have a governor that's running, a black lady running for governor for the state of Alabama. I'm not even convinced she's gonna be the best person for the job. Well,
she can't be no worse.
No, can't nobody be no worse.
Diyawn, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. Send your husband the best of luck in solidarity. Tell him to hold his head. We're grateful for the work you're doing. Veronica, hang with me. We got much more to talk about right here at theGrio. Welcome back to theGrio with Marc Lamont Hill. Veronica Johnson has been doing the work with the Alabama Justice Initiative to help improve conditions for incarcerated people in state prisons. And Veronica is here to tell us more about her organization. Veronica, what does your org do and why?
Okay, we have a lot of things that we actually do in the community. So Alabama Justice Initiative was founded by LaTonya Tate. Her son went to prison at 19 years old. He's 39 now, and he just got off papers officially a year and a half ago. So pretty much he's been on what we consider to be papers his entire life. So based upon her son going to prison at such an early age, she dedicated most of her life to this fight. So a couple of things we do what's called participatory defense. So that's where we'll have families to come in who've never had any involvement with the criminal justice system before, and we'll kind of help them walk their way through it. We help with parole hearings. There's been several cases where we've helped with a parole hearing and people have actually been released on parole. So we'll go to the parole board as an advocate or on their behalf and assist them with being released on parole with participatory defense. We're also currently working with a coalition of other organizations to get parole laws changed in the state of Alabama. So most of our laws are draconian, they're horrible. So we need some new parole laws put into place. And we've also been working wholeheartedly and diligently with organizations from all over the country to stop the prison bill. So that's how we were able to stop the successful that's how we were able to stop the prison bill the first time, and that's how we were able to slow it down this second time. We also do civic engagement work. A lot of people who've formerly been incarcerated, they have no idea that they still have the ability to vote. There's certain paperwork or certain documentation that has to be done in order for them to regain those voting rights. And we have that documentation, and we can help you get registered to vote because they count on people continue to be disenfranchised. So if you're disenfranchised or think you're disenfranchised, then you will not exercise your right to vote.
That is the key right there. Think you're disenfranchised. Some folk in some states are, and we're fighting to change that. But oftentimes our open enemies win by the margin of us that can't vote, don't know how to vote, don't have access to all of our rights, don't have the proper political and just general education about our rights. Mm-hmm. So the work you do in your organization is so important. It's so necessary. Veronica, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
Alabama's prisons are bad, but many other states aren't too far behind. Keri Lynn Blakinger is up next with her investigation from behind the walls. More of theGrio coming up. Welcome back to theGrio with Marc Lamont Hill. I'm joined by investigative reporter Keri Lynn Blakinger. Keri, we've been focusing on the Alabama prisons, but they're not the only prison system in the country that's in need of our attention. I mean, you've done stories on Texas, Oregon, New York. What are you finding?
Yeah, I'm finding that, perhaps not surprisingly, there are a lot of prison systems in this country that are a complete mess. And I think that the southern prisons are far worse than people understand that they are. Even with the increased scrutiny and the increasing number of images we see come out of these places, if you're actually sort of consistently in contact with people on the inside and seeing the real conditions in real time, it's far worse than people understand.
What does worse mean? What does worse look like? Because some people can't wrap their minds around this.
Yeah, worse can mean a number of things. I mean, first of all, I think that there's a clear lack of staff, and it sounds counterintuitive that prisoners often want more staff than what they have, but the lack of staff means that sometimes they're not getting let out to shower for days or weeks. They're not getting out, to go to rec or, to see fresh air. There's one state in which I've had men complain that they're being fed by simply putting all of their meals in a trash bag, tossing it in the pod, and, being like, you guys figure it out. And some of the food is, even more unrecognizable than what you're seeing coming out of Alabama. I've seen some images out of, I believe, Georgia, where their meal was white bread with what looks like feces on it, and is apparently like hardened peanut butter with some sticky jelly that makes a turd-like shape. I mean, these are unrecognizable things that you would generally consider to be abuse if you fed them to a child, for instance.
Wow. Now, the abolitionist to me is like, all right, I don't want to call for more COs, though. I don't need more correctional officers. But it seems to me that the issue, as you're pointing out, isn't that we're in desperate need of more law enforcement as much as we need people who are incarcerated to have access to certain resources like rec time, like healthy food conditions, like being able to leave what would otherwise be almost solitary confinement like conditions if they're doing 23, 24 hours a day in their cell. How do we, in your estimation, kind of create a situation where the prisoner's needs are met, but where we don't just kind of normalize the idea that all we need is more COs to fix the problem?
Well, I mean, I think that there's some of these tasks that could theoretically be done by, people who are not correctional officers. And some of the staffing issues are not just correctional officer staffing issues. I mean, a lot of these places have a lack of medical staff. Unfortunately, when you have a lack of correction officers, then in some situations you just don't have anyone to walk prisoners to medical. So they're not getting medical care because there's literally no one to do the task. And I mean, the idea that right now what some prisons might need is more staff to perform very basic functions, I don't think is incompatible with abolition. It's just that in Southern prisons, we are not in a place politically where abolition is going to happen tomorrow. And then we need to think about like what happens in the interim. Like how do we create a system that is the least damaging that it can be, and the closest to humane that we can manage in the interim until there's some better solution.
You've talked about the South, and of course we know, like you said, New York prisons are terrible. I'm here in Pennsylvania, where the state prisons are awful. But there's something about these Southern prisons that is different. Why do we see so many of these awful things coming out of Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, even Louisiana?
I mean, I think that historically it's not surprising, for one. But, I think that there's also a certain attitude towards incarceration in the South. And I mean, I think it's sort of for all of the reasons that you would expect, from funding to race to, longstanding views on criminal justice, that Southern prisons have been more of a mess than prisons in the North. And I think the surprising thing, though, is the degree to which this is true. Like, I did time in New York, and I covered prisons in the Northeast, and, I've covered prisons in Texas. And once I expanded past Texas and started looking at prisons in other southern states, in, Alabama, South Carolina, Georgia, I was really struck by, even as someone who did time, I was struck by how much worse prisons are than I was aware. And that is specific to the South. Like, we all, like, people in the North understand how bad prisons are there, but, multiply that times 25. That's what you have in the South.
One of the things that we're seeing now through social media is the inside of prisons. So many people hear about prison, they watch movies about prison, but they've never experienced prison, and they've never had raw footage of what's going on. One of the things that we've seen in these uprisings, both in Alabama, also on the West Coast last year, is the actual conditions. How important is it for everyday people to see what's happening inside of prisons? When we think about people watching Martin Luther King get beaten on the Pettus Bridge, or people reading about what's happening inside of, food factories, like thinking like Upton Sinclair in the Jungle. There's a way that once people get the access, they move differently. Is that the case with prisons? Like, will we see a noticeable shift once people get access to the information, they see these images?
I mean, yes and no. I think that it's always true that images seem more credible. I've been getting complaints about food in Texas prisons, for instance, for years. And it wasn't until during the pandemic, when I actually was, getting images of the food, that people were really appalled. And that, I think, it generated a lot more attention and interest in attempting to change it. And things did improve for some period of time, although, as is often the case, they sort of reverted to, the mean here in Texas. But I do think with prisons, there is one big difference in that there are a lot of people that are very willing to dismiss people that have been convicted of a crime. And I think that part of the reason they're willing to dismiss that is not just because they've been convicted of a crime, but because these are disproportionately, poor folks and folks of color. And I think that is an uphill battle, getting people to care about that, even when the visual evidence is right in front of them.
Wow. As a formerly incarcerated person, you understand to some extent what it takes and what it means for people to have an uprising, right? I mean, the amount of organizing, the amount of commitment, the amount of outrage, and the amount of risk that you assume to do so. Do you have a message or a thought for the people out there in Alabama who are struggling and fighting for dignity and justice right now?
Man, as someone who did time in a women's prison, I'm kind of in awe, because that is not really a thing you see happen as much in women's prisons. Even in Alabama, the women's prison didn't participate. Women in prison have typically not been as good at organizing for probably a whole lot of other reasons. I could do a whole other interview on that. But I've been so impressed by by how well they've gotten so many people to participate in that, because I think that that's something that's really hard to manage in the environment of scarcity, of manufactured scarcity that you have behind bars. That makes all of the stakes so much higher.
Wow, very insightful. Keri Lynn Blakinger, thank you so much for joining us today, and also for your committed efforts to shedding light on this issue and so many other issues facing incarcerated people in this country. All right, family, before I let you go, I know many of you have watched this episode and said, why are they spending so much time on prisoners? Prisoners are locked up for a reason. What about the victims of their crimes? What about the people who are harmed by their behavior? How can you have sympathy for the criminal and not for the victim? And here's the answer to that. That's not the case at all. Yes, I care about the harm that is done to people. Yes, I care about the victims of crimes. The truth, though, is most people in prison, first of all, aren't in prison for mass murder, child molestation, rape, and all these awful things that absolutely demand accountability. Most people are locked up for crimes of poverty, crimes of desperation, drug use, drug addiction, and things like that. The second thing is, even if a person does an awful crime, even if a person does the worst thing imaginable, they're still a human being. We have laws against torture. We have laws against depriving people of sleep, of food, of beating people, of having people in solitary confinement, at least we should, for too long, because it's a form of torture. The reason we have these things is just because you do something wrong doesn't mean that anything can happen to you. In the same way that we want to protect the victims and avenge, the lives of the victims of murder, we also want to protect the lives of people who do harm. It doesn't mean that they're one and the same, but it does mean that everybody deserves to live with dignity. Everybody deserves to live with safety. Everybody deserves equal protection under the law. And so when I look at these prisoners rise up in Alabama, I'm not pretending that they're all innocent or that they're all blameless. What I am suggesting, though, is that the conditions that they're forced to deal with, just like prisoners who are locked up all around the world, what they're forced to deal with is often inhumane, unjust, and even unconscionable. And so we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can fight for accountability for the people who were harmed, but we can never lose sight of the humanity of those people who are locked up in cages in the United States, whether it's Alabama, Texas, Pennsylvania, California, or people around the world. Because when we do that, we lose track of our own humanity. We lose track of our own sense of right and wrong. And that will destroy a democracy. So let's do it all. Let's protect the vulnerable, and let's protect the people who are made vulnerable by these prisons.